I'm going to talk to y'all about this concept called hypothesis-driven development. My name's Damon. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a principal from Eighth Light in New York. The agenda, I'm going to take us through what is hypothesis-driven development. We'll look at a couple of scenarios, one with, one without. We'll do a side-by-side comparison and talk through some details about how to get started, what to watch out for. So what is hypothesis-driven development? The definition that I came up with is it's a frame to provide direction through intent, leveraging an organization's collective creativity, ingenuity to achieve outcomes. It's not my creation. This is something that I got exposure to over the last couple of years. I became a student of the lean principles, and this is something that kind of popped up over and over for me. I also had, sort of my own frustration with, this first scenario that I found myself exposed to pretty frequently, but I'll get to that in a little bit. So what does this look like? We have some desired outcome. We state an assumption about how to achieve that outcome. And we define measurable criteria to help understand if the progress we're making towards that outcome. So here we've got, we believe some assumption will achieve some outcome. We know we should continue if we see some evidence. So one might ask, isn't this just the scientific method? And somebody did ask me this, and I said, yes, you're absolutely right. It is. And it's more than that. Here we're framing a question to answer, not some feature to build. We can't predict the future, and we can't always know the first or second order effects of our actions. Forming hypotheses helps us deal with the uncertainty and lets us know if we should continue or if we should pivot. We're explicitly connecting this question to an outcome. Outcomes are the impetus for any output that we produce. So before we get into what hypothesis-driven development might look like in action, I want to describe a scenario that is familiar to me. It might be familiar to y'all. And let's imagine we have a fictional product called Collectionist. They're building a brand new collaboration tool specifically for teams where users can create arbitrary collections of resources, links, images, arbitrary text, stickies, etc. You can imagine a hybrid between like a Pinterest and a Miro. They've launched an MVP. They've started to acquire a handful of users. And at the moment, their primary focus is to increase user engagement and collaboration, which they think is going to drive adoption and position the product as critical to their customers' productivity. A manager at the company thinks that adding a comment feature to the collections, adding comments to collections is the way to start to meet this objective. And so a backlog is created. A manager loads up the backlog with a series of tasks. They may have done some research or analysis first. The development team works with the manager and they refine these tasks at the refinement meeting. They haggle over and spend a lot of time figuring out what the acceptance criteria is going to be for each task. The team starts to work on it. Along the way, they discover new information that changes the course of action. And now they go back to the manager and they're sort of negotiating new scope, new acceptance criteria, back and forth. They finally clear the hurdles, they get all the tasks done, and they launch the feature in 3 weeks. So now collections have comments and the team is ready to build the next feature. So some observations about this scenario. The team is done when the tasks have been deployed, right? When the feature is done, when it's in production, the team's done. Success is completing the work, but building the right thing is the responsibility of the manager. They're most concerned with delivering a feature, often with a deadline, which describes an output-driven or a project mindset. And this is a command and control style organization. where managers dictate the work and the team carries out the tasks. So I've labeled this the task-driven approach. That'll come back later. So let's imagine an alternate scenario. We've got the same product, alternate time, alternate reality, and we're going to bake in some speculation. So again, collectionists' objective is to increase user engagement and collaboration. They think that adding comments to their product might be one way to make progress towards that objective. Ultimately, they have no way to know for sure, and so they've decided to launch an experiment to test this assumption. So instead of defining expected output as a series of tasks in a backlog with a detailed acceptance criteria for a product development team, they formulate a hypothesis with the team to communicate their assumptions, their outcomes, and measurable criteria to tell them what kind of progress they're making. So we believe some assumption will achieve some outcome. We know we should continue if we see some evidence. And here's the hypothesis. We believe adding comments to collections will achieve an increase in user engagement and collaboration. We know we should continue if we see a median of 3 comments per collection with more than 1 active member by the end of the quarter. So the belief here is that adding comments to collections will lead to more engagement. It's going to help them make progress towards their objective. And they're measuring that by some number of comments per collection, only looking at specific collections that might be eligible for comments. It's also time-bound. The end of the quarter is the scope. So some observations here. The team is done when they've met the criteria of the experiment, meaning that it's either been validated or invalidated. Success here is measured by what the team learns, not necessarily by what they ship. Outcomes are the responsibility of everyone, right? The team and the manager, the entire organization is thinking about this hypothesis, which is connecting the activity to the objective. The primary focus is on adding value, which describes a value-driven or product mindset. And this promotes the principle of mission, which is which describes the intent of the mission and why, which is to increase engagement and collaboration. So we went through both of those scenarios. Now I want to let's take another look side by side, and we can kind of pick these apart. So on the left, that task-driven approach compared to hypothesis-driven approach. So when are we done? On the left, the team is done when the feature is deployed. It's okay, we don't know if we've actually met our goal. We only know that users can comment on a collection, but we don't know if they are. What if no one comments? What if no one uses the feature? On the right, we're done when we've met the criteria of our experiment, meaning that we've either validated it or invalidated it. In this scenario, done is connected to the value added or not added. Success. On the left, success is completing the work on time, within budget. Building the right thing is somebody else's responsibility. Failure for the team is simply not delivering. On the right, success is measured by what the team learns, not by what they ship. Not learning something would be considered a failure. So launching an experiment, not collecting that feedback, that's kind of like the realm of failure in this mode. Outcomes. On the left, the responsibility of outcomes are on the manager. They're dictating the work, they're passing that on for somebody else to complete. The product development team here is just responsible for delivery. This disconnects the team from the purpose and denies them the accountability for outcomes, which is a missed opportunity to leverage their creativity and ingenuity. With a hypothesis-driven approach, outcomes become everyone's responsibility, and the organization is able to take advantage of the collective creativity and ingenuity to help them meet their objective. Where's the value? With a task-driven approach, we're most concerned with getting our tasks done, getting them done on time, on budget. This is a project mindset. We focusing on the outputs disconnects us from seeing the value added or lack thereof. We're focused on outputs instead of outcomes. On the right, the team is collectively focused on adding value, which is a value-driven or product mindset. The hypothesis provides alignment on what and why it is essential to customers in the business. Everyone is focusing on achieving outcomes rather than just producing output. Management style. We've got a command and control style on the left, where we're defining and passing on the work. This style of management stems from manufacturing, where we were optimizing for producing identical physical goods. On the right, we've got the principle of mission, which is adapted from military strategy, where you are explicit about the mission and why it's important and empower folks to make decisions about their actions based on the context that they have. In software, teams flourish when we enable folks to pursue expertise, communicate the purpose behind the work, the intent, and grant them the autonomy to determine how the work is done. So if you zoom out a little bit and squint your eyes, you can kind of see that on the left, we've got an output-centric mode, and on the right, we've got a value-centric or outcome-centric perspective. And if you zoom out a little further, on the left, we're primarily focused on the what, and on the right, we're focused on the what in service of the why. Okay, so we've seen it in action. We've seen how hypothesis-driven development can be applied. Let's talk about how to get started. What are some good qualities of a good hypothesis? First, give direction through intent, empower the team to make decisions, state why it is worth doing, what outcomes are you attempting to achieve, leave out detail on how, give the team the space to come up with creative approaches, include measurement criteria so that you have feedback about how you're doing, and make it time-bound so that you know you should continue or pivot. The time-bound measurement criteria is important because it provides a built-in expiration for your hypotheses. What happens if we don't meet our measurement criteria? We need to reevaluate if this capability will help us meet the objective. We can lengthen the experiment and continue to iterate, or we can pivot and try something else. If we go back to the collectionist scenario, the second one where they're experimenting, we can imagine that maybe they determined that comments were not gonna help them meet their objective. And they should celebrate the fact that they didn't spend more time building a robust commenting feature that it turns out people don't want. In this model, we want to maximize the outcomes and minimize the outputs. So learning that comments don't achieve our outcome, they don't provide the anticipated value. Keeping an existing feature, or worse, continuing to iterate on that feature would not get us closer to where we want to be. So when and where? I've talked about product development. That's kind of been the primary focus, but you can apply this in a few other areas as well. Process improvements. We've all probably been in retros where we generate a plethora of action items that are more or less actionable. An alternative might be to define some new target condition that your team wants to meet, and then speculate on what kind of change the team can do to help make progress towards that target condition, and then define some measurable criteria to measure progress. Organizational change is another application. Organizations are complex adaptive systems, which means that we can't know the impact of a change without making that change and observing the result. So framing these changes as hypotheses keeps us in the experimental frame, provides us with criteria to measure, and connects us to the desired outcome. Some things to watch out for. The nature of hypotheses is that not all of them will be validated. And so your organization, the people you're working with, need to be prepared for that. It's easy and natural to see the value in the output alone, but the organization also needs to see value in the learning for this to work, and misalignment on where the value is a recipe for conflict. There's value in the work not done. What's better than framing features as experiments? Finding out that the feature isn't worth your time at all. No code is better than some code. You need a foundation for feedback. You need some way to collect feedback about a hypothesis. This could be a product with a user base and MVP, or it might be a paper prototype that you test on the street. And lastly, this sort of approach places a lot of autonomy and trust in individuals in the team. And this might be an adjustment for some folks. Personal preferences as well as experience levels on your team can help you decide if it's right for you. And lastly, I want to touch on the power of language and the impact of the experimental frame. We tend to view plans as deterministic and that they're easy to see as commitments. Planning is essential, but we make our plans when we have less information than in the present. And hypotheses, experiments, or bets are helpful ways to remind us that uncertainty exists and that there is value in the learning. An invalidated hypothesis should be a perfectly valid result of our work. And if I've piqued your interest, I hope I have. I encourage you to try a hypothesis-driven approach. You can even use a hypothesis to help you evaluate if this approach is going to work for you and your team. If you're interested in learning more, these are some of the resources that heavily influenced what I talked to you all about today. I encourage you to check them out. Thanks.